Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, throughout the spring transfer portal window, we've been banging the table for former Michigan State defensive lineman Derrick Harmon, who, I think largely was one of the best players available in the transfer portal during this spring window. Dan Lanning, the Oregon Ducks, come out of nowhere, make this one happen. And Dill, want to do a film deep dive on Derrick Harmon, talk about what he brings to this Oregon Ducks program. But I think the thing that fires me up the most is not only did I think Derrick Harmon was the best interior defensive lineman available, I also think it filled probably one of the last questions we had about this Oregon team heading into 2024. If you're asking me about this Oregon team, I've been pretty vocal. I think this is a team that can win a national championship. And I think Derrick Harmon really just solidified my thoughts that this is one of the most dangerous teams in the country. Want to get into the film, talk about what Derrick Harmon brings to this Oregon Ducks defense before we get into it. And as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, the Oregon Duck fans. Whether we're talking the recruiting trail, the transfer portal, you guys have continued to show a ton of love, a ton of support to the fellas. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Derrick Harmon, as Michigan fans, a guy that we know very, very well over the last couple of years. Before we get into the film, I'll give you the tee box here. What does Derrick Harmon bring to this Oregon Ducks defense?
It's a true weapon on the inside. And we've kind of been talking about that. Like, what was the one thing it felt like Oregon kind of lacked? It was that guy who could kind of be really disruptive in that middle, not take over a game necessarily, but just be a guy you notice and is impactful and isn't just like a solid player, because they were solid last year. They had good players, but they didn't have anyone who was like pushing on great and really disruptive. And you kind of look at the way Harmon can play and how disruptive he can be in the run, in the pass, getting off of blocks and making those plays. He's so badly what they needed.
I believe we used difference maker for this Oregon Ducks team. Like when we came out of the 2023 season, started looking towards that 2024 season, we knew this Oregon Ducks team was going to be really good, right? But you look on the inside of that defensive line, and this is, not a shot at guys like Popo or Casey Rogers, really quality football players for the Oregon Ducks. They weren't difference makers. What does Dan Lanning go out and do? He lands two difference makers, and not only Derrick Harmon, but also Jamari Caldwell coming from Houston. This Oregon defensive line on the inside went from maybe having some question marks about do they have the guys to compete at the highest level to, is this one of the better interior defensive line duos that you see in the country?
What we were talking about is you were starting to see them play really good, like solid football. Like the defensive linemen, you can tell, are starting to play a little bit more violent, a little bit more physical than what they were in the previous Oregon Duck iterations. But you didn't have that guy who was dominating football games. And I think, again, even Jamari Caldwell, like we love what he brought. You need guys like him in your roster, but he's not a guy like Derrick Harmon who necessarily can take a football game over. I really think this was a big move. And obviously a lot of teams wanted good defensive tackles. People are desperate, and maybe not even more desperate than Oregon. So it's a huge win to get him on.
Yeah, that's one of the things that stands out is because they landed Jamari Caldwell. I felt pretty good about guys like Amari Washington heading into 2024. And we always say this with Dan Lanning, like it's never enough for Dan Lanning. He learned from Kirby Smart. It's just continue to get competition, continue to get good players into this program. Let's get into the film. And Dill, one of the things that I appreciate the most out of Derrick Harmon is we're going to get to the reps where he's being a difference maker, right? Getting after the quarterback, creating negative plays. One of my favorite aspects about what Derrick Harmon brings to the table is he can also do the dirty work. You talk about guys that can hold up on double teams, let your linebackers play free. These plays aren't necessarily going to make the highlight tapes, but you take a look at any elite defense across the country, Michigan, the Georgia Bulldogs, they have guys that can do this kind of role. You take a look at him lining up, kind of head over this left guard. You play the clip here. Derrick Harmon at 6'5", 320, playing with really, really good pad level, really just eating up this double team. Dill, you normally see when guys get double teamed, maybe 2 or 3 yards given up. Derrick Harmon really doesn't give up a yard, but more importantly, what does this allow the linebackers to do? You got two linebackers playing clean, being able to fill those running lanes, come in and make plays. The dirty work is something that I appreciate the most out of what Derrick Harmon brings to the table, but you make no mistake about it, Dill. Derrick Harmon can also be a difference maker on the inside of that defensive line as well. Very similar formation, head up on this left guard right here. I'm going to use my hands, get off this block and go make a play in the backfield. When you combine the ability to be a difference maker, but also be able to do the dirty work, I mean, that's why I think we both fell in love with Derrick Harmon when he hit the portal.
And I think you've said it, and frankly, like we've seen that, and you go back to guys who have big stats and do good things on the inside. But if you can't see it down to down playing that way and being able to hold up on double teams, I mean, that's the difference fundamentally of giving up 5 to 6 yards on a first down run versus 2 to 3. And that's game-changing football. Like that, if you can't stand up and do that, it doesn't matter if you get sacks. It doesn't matter if you make big plays. Then just down to down, you can't be on the field because if you're that type of defensive tackle, you're a liability. And Derrick Harmon, I think you mentioned, does a really good job of towing that line where he plays the game the right way, but also has that athleticism, that upside to make those game-changing plays.
More than just winning football, it's Big Ten football. Like you're the Oregon Ducks heading into the Big Ten. Teams will eat you alive on the ground if you don't have guys on the inside that can do that kind of dirty work. Because
you think back to the Ohio State defensive line in 2021, I think you go back to, they had a lot of guys who were going to be high draft picks, could get sacks, could make plays. But when they played a team like Michigan, you just saw they couldn't stand up. They couldn't hold up double teams. And Michigan was getting 5 to 6 yards of play. It doesn't matter if you're a good pass rusher at that point. If you can't play with your hand in the dirt and eat doubles and just do like what you said, the dirty work, none of it matters. So again, he has that. He has the upside. He's very complete.
At other positions, you can kind of get a feel for how good players are based on the stat sheet. You look on the inside of the defensive line, you can't really do that. Now, Dill, we talk about doing the dirty work. Derrick Harmon also really an elite pass rusher and can win with a pass rush in so many different ways. Yeah, 6'5", 320. He uses his hands exceptionally well. Now, we're going to get into some clips where he's just being a bulldog. You know what I mean? Using the power that he has in that lower half and really just in his body and his hands to just put offensive linemen into the lap of quarterbacks. You also see Derrick Harmon. This is a guy that's played a lot of football. He knows how to use his hands, get off blocks, working again on that left guard deal. Justin Evans-Jenkins, I think he's a damn good football player for Nebraska. Derrick Harmon was giving him the work all game. You see him just using these hands, getting his hands off him, going out, getting the quarterback, forcing a throw. I mean, this is a guy actually turns into a pick. I mean, those kind of plays, they're not going to show up in the stat sheet for a sack for Derrick Harmon. Who caused that turnover? That was Derrick Harmon coming up, winning on the inside of the offensive line. Another play here, Dill, where he's working on the left tackle for Michigan, a guy that got selected in the day 2 of the NFL draft.
Day 3, but still a good player.
Day 3. Thanks, Dill. Thanks for the correction. You see him take this little stunt here. I mean, just put Henderson right into the backfield. Again, NFL caliber tackle, Derrick Harmon physically overwhelming a guy like Ladarius Henderson. You take a look at this last play. We're just going to straight up go speed the power here. I mean, we're lining up right over that left guard. We are going to put this left guard right into the back of the lap of this quarterback. Another really impressive play. And when you start taking a look at this Oregon defensive line heading into 2024, I think you're feeling really good about what this unit's going to be.
And you needed more of that. You needed guys who could be disruptive in the middle because you kind of look what made Michael Penix such a problem for Oregon is they couldn't rush him in the middle. And then you see Michigan have those dynamic defensive linemen, have a guy like Mason Graham or Kenny Grant. They really threw Michael Penix off his spot. They were in his face all game. And again, it's okay. You need to have good edge rushers. We think that guys like Tatum Tuioti and some of these other young guys are going to emerge as well for Oregon, or you certainly hope so. That makes Oregon very dangerous. But you're at least going to have some guys in the inside who can be disruptive. And again, just make it harder on quarterbacks than it was at times against the better teams, it felt like, for Oregon.
And I know Ben Roberts transfers out, but you start talking about another thing we talk about all the time, and that is depth on the defensive line. I mean, Jamari Caldwell, Derrick Harmon, that is an elite duo on the inside. But then you start taking a look at the 2 deep and you start talking about guys like Amari Washington, who probably starts on most Power 5 programs across the country. Dill, what made Michigan so special last year? The depth on the defensive line, the ability to rotate in so many different quality bodies. I start looking at this Oregon depth chart specifically on the defensive line and say they have those kind of guys as well. Y'all know I'm fired up for the Oregon Ducks. I think Derrick Harmon was really just the cherry on top. 2024, I think, can be a special year for the Oregon Ducks. Still, we're going to do a lot of film reviews on this program throughout the summer. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.